Hi there, and welcome to our third episode in the creative writing series. My name is Chris McKenna, and today we're going to be talking about characters. But before we start, I should point out I'm dressed a little differently today. I'm at school, so my students are all away on retreat for a few days, so I get to have a bit more free time, which is nice. So, like I said, today is going to be on our characters. So what do you think makes a good character? Is going to be the first question we're asking ourselves. So to figure this out, I would like you to, in a few moments, pause the video. And what we're going to do is, or what I would like you to do, is write down a list of characters that you think are good characters. Now, by good, I don't mean that you like the character. I mean that the character is well written. There are many good characters who are very obnoxious, nasty people. So I mean well written as opposed to alignment good. You could do the same for bad characters as well. This can often help you avoid some of the pitfalls. So once you've made your list, you can sit down with a group of people. Hopefully you're doing this as part of a group. If not, you can talk to the dog or something to that effect. Try and work out together or by yourself, what is it about those characters that makes them good characters? What things do they have in common across the board that makes you appreciate those characters? So we're going to pause the video, take a few minutes to write down some of your ideas, and then we'll continue in a bit. So if you could pause the video now, please, that would be great. So hopefully you've come up with a good list of well-written characters, and you have some ideas about why you think they are interesting characters. What is it in their essence across the board that makes an interesting character? Now, what you may have found if you were discussing with someone was that there's not agreement across the board. Different people have different writing styles, and that's fine. We're not writing the same book. We are all trying to do something different. So characters that fit with one type of story are not necessarily going to fit with another. That's okay. What's important is that you can recognize for yourself what is it that you like in characters? What is it you want to put into your own characters? That said, we're going to talk about some common things that come up, some general ideas that often appear. The first one would be that many people say they think characters should be realistic. On the other side, many people say they think their characters should be larger than life. In truth, there is no right answer. It's up to you. However, I would suggest that with different genres, different types work best. So if you take realistic characters, they are very good in stories that are rooted in the real world. I am just reading a book by an author called Deborah Mantle, and she creates some very interesting real world characters. And you can really believe that they could be people in real life. But if you were to take that same character and put it into a fantasy adventure story, it wouldn't work. It would be dull. It's not what the reader is wanting to see. Likewise, if you took a larger than life Harry Potter-esque character and put it into a normal world day setting, that's not going to work either. So there's no set ways for this. Just what is it that you're trying to write and what would be suitable for your style and for the type of book that you want to write. So once you've got an idea about that, then that will help you quite a lot, I hope. One thing though is with all characters, it doesn't matter what genre you're writing in, unless you want to write sort of pulp trash novels. If you do, that's okay, go for it. But I think most people don't. I think most people want some depth to their novels, even if it is an action adventure. So one thing is characters have to be three-dimensional. So what do I mean by three-dimensional? Well, I mean there has to be more facets to them. They cannot be a stereotype. Stereotypes in stories make people cringe. There's nothing worse than the sidekick stereotype. It's horrible. Now, one thing I've found for myself, for getting around this idea of the stereotype generic characters, is trying to understand that everybody has their own story. So you watching this, you are not concerned about me and my life. You're concerned about your life. You're focused on your own life. Just like I think probably every other person in this world. The center of their universe is themselves. So why then in a book would you have a character whose universe is centered around your main character? It doesn't ring true. So everybody wants something for themselves. Everybody wants their own satisfaction. So people don't follow around the main characters and do stuff because of the main characters. They do stuff, they do things for their own reasons. I think in Kurt Vonnegut's Rules of Writing, he lists one of his most important things as being everybody should want something. Now that's not just your main character and your villain. That's everybody across the board. Once you start realizing that, your stories will come to life a lot more. There'll be a lot more natural conflict between people within the story. They won't just all follow one person around. Although it's not writing, well, it is writing, but it's movie writing or writing for television. I think one of the best people I've seen at this is Joss Whedon, and he seems really like if you've ever seen Firefly or Serenity, the movie, he takes these characters and they all have their clear goals of things that they want. They don't just turn up and say, "Oh, you're the main character. I'm going to follow you, Mr. Protagonist." No, they all are trying to pull. They're on a ship. They're on a spaceship. They're all trying to pull the spaceship in their own directions. They don't just suddenly fall in love with one person. He doesn't become their messiah. And it works really well. And in effect, what you get is a story that's about people who happen to be on a spaceship. But you could take those people and you could probably put them in some other backdrop, and that's the same personal relationship will be there. And a lot of the time that's what's missing from stories. People get too caught up in the plot and they forget that these are real people who should be interacting with each other, who care about other things, not just your story. So something to think about when you're writing. Try and keep it in mind. What does every character want?
Setting.
Every character. No stereotypes.
Plot with beginning,
anymore.
middle, and end.
Okay.
Characters.
The second thing, and this applies, I guess, to the villains mostly. I don't know any famous writers that have said this, but personally for me it's a massive one. I think it's really important, is that there are no bad guys. So there are bad people. There can be bad people doing bad things. That's okay. That's the world. Bad things happen. People do bad things. But do you honestly think that people wake up in the morning and say, "Ah, I am the villain, I am the bad guy, and I am going to do bad things"? I'm pretty sure nobody in the world does. Maybe I'm a bit idealistic about it, but I really don't think that people are bad. I think sometimes they're selfish or have limited views. Sometimes they're too concentrated on, say, their own family not to see how much they're damaging the wider world. But everybody generally believes that they are an okay person. There's nobody who thinks, I am the bad guy. And so if you have people in your story, especially the main villain, who is simply acting because he is the bad guy, then it doesn't work. It's two-dimensional. It's not three-dimensional. So think about his motivation. I guess it's connected to the first point. What does he want? But what he wants shouldn't be, I want to take over the world because I'm evil. There should be something much more than that. A bit controversial, I guess, but terrorists don't blow up buildings because they think they are bad people. Terrorists blow up buildings because they think they are exceptionally good people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for some greater good. Now, they might be very, very misguided, but that doesn't mean they think of themselves as bad. So if you're going to have terrorists in your story, or you're going to have people doing bad things, have a reason. I might upset some Tolkienites here, but personally I don't like it when that reason is a magic ring. And I'm a big fan of Tolkien's writings, but it shouldn't be something outside, again, this greater evil that's twisting things. Can be, but I think people have moved on a lot since then, and they're looking for characters with much more to them. Even they're bad guys. And some of the best action, like, I don't read many action novels, but the best action movies I've seen have been ones where the villains tempt me to their side, where they almost convince me that what they're doing is right. The Joker in the second Batman movie. I'm not sure who I would go with. Who do I really follow along with? Okay, so have a think about that. The other thing that a lot of people struggle with their characters is their protagonist, is the main guy. Excuse me. So the main character in your story, he should be heroic. That's okay, or he can be heroic. He not necessarily should be. If you've read any of the Flashman books, he's a very unheroic protagonist who spends much of his time trying to get away from the fights as he can, and accidentally ending up in trouble that he has to overcome. But I think that's the point, is the character can't be too good. He can be heroic, but he can't be too good. It's actually been quite successful, so this is maybe not the best advice for everybody, but there's been a reasonably successful self-published science fiction series online. And the guy's got some really good ideas. It tends to come from, it's kind of like a mix of different sci-fi shows all thrown together. And so it's quite interesting, especially for a lot of people who are into Star Trek and other such shows, like myself. But it suffers from one of the worst character problems, and it appears a lot, is that people want their main character to be able to do everything. They kind of have a hero complex. So in this sci-fi series, he is the captain, so he's a leader. He's also a fantastic engineer. He's a great diplomat. He's a fantastic fighter. And basically, it becomes boring because you know he can do everything. All the other characters in the story become pointless to some extent. You know that he's better than the chief engineer at engineering. So it doesn't really work. And it comes up a lot. A lot of people want their heroes to be overly good. What you should be looking at in your heroes, or what I think you should be looking at in your heroes, is their flaws. A thing that makes a character interesting is not so much what they are good at, it's what they're bad at. It's the dark side to their personality. It's this that creates the conflict. It's this that gives them something that they have to overcome. If your character is the best and can do everything, there's no challenge. He can overcome everything straight away. What we want, or what I want when I write, is someone who has problems. It's a bit cliche, but being an alcoholic is the alcoholic detective is a very cliched version of this, so don't use that one. But it's an example that comes up a lot. The detective is not whiter than white. He has his problems. If you don't believe me that it makes the character more interesting, maybe you want to think about Star Wars. Who is more interesting, Luke Skywalker or Han Solo? I think most people would agree, maybe a bit of an argument about this, but I think most people, at least older people, would agree that Han Solo is much more interesting because he has flaws. He is challenged, whereas just to be the chosen one, it doesn't work. It doesn't work quite so well. So rule number 1, everyone has their own wants. And rule number 2, your main character should have flaws. Sorry, I've got that in the wrong order. Let me try that again. So rule number 1, everyone has their own wants. Rule number 2, there are no bad guys. And rule number 3, make sure your main characters have some flaws. There are a lot more rules in this. These are just ones that personally I find are really helpful in overcoming the main problems that people have with their characters. So maybe you've got some rules of your own, maybe you've got some ideas, or maybe you disagree with what I've said. That's fine, go with it. However, I want you to take this time, again, pause the video. If you are with some people, then perfect, have a chat. If you are by yourself, you can argue with the dog, or you can write an angry response on YouTube or on your blog or something. It doesn't have to be angry, it can be happy as well, that's fine. Okay, but do something, react. So especially I want you to think about what are your own rules, what things have you found when you are writing that help you create three-dimensional characters. Try and keep it general rather than specific to your genre. Try and give us a more general set of rules that we could use for this. Okay, so pause the video, please. Okay, so hopefully you've done that, and I'm looking forward to reading some of your responses. The next thing we're going to talk about are some useful ways or useful things that we can do for helping us to create good characters. Some of these I don't agree with, I should point out. However, other people suggested them to me, and I thought it might be good for you can test them out yourself and see what you can come up with. So one of the first suggestions I had, it was actually I went to a course for writers when I was in Japan, and one person was suggesting, the person lecturing at this point, was saying often to create characters that are not stereotypes, what we can do is invert. We can invert 1 or 2 points of the usual stereotype. The example would be, think of a female trucker, or think of a trucker first. So you think of a trucker, usually most people will think of quite a fat, large man. I apologize if there are any writing truckers. This is the stereotype, not reality. Okay, there's possibly a large, fat man, fairly uneducated, likes beer, a bit rough around the edges. What she said you could do is make a list of these points, make a list of things, and then maybe pick just 1 or 2 and change them to the opposite. So I think the 2 that she maybe chose were You could, instead of having a male truck driver, you could make it a woman. Instead of having the truck driver as being particularly fat, you could make it an incredibly attractive female truck driver. And so this is a way of kind of dealing with stereotypes. I think it's really good for maybe some side characters, people who are not going to be in your story that much. I personally wouldn't use it for my more in-depth characters, and I wouldn't use it too often. That's the other thing. I think if you overuse it, it starts to become very, very quirky. If everybody in your story is quirky, it doesn't necessarily work, unless that's the type of writing you're planning to do, sort of humorous, quirky writing. It's about degrees. It's quite useful, but don't overuse it. Second suggestion is the 100 questions. 100 being an arbitrary number, but 100 questions. So this is not really a way for developing a character in the first place. This would be more for once you have an idea for your character, a way that you can make them better, a way that you can really improve your character, is to make a list of 100, we won't call them arbitrary, but 100 questions about normal things in their life. It could be, what do they like for breakfast? It could be, do they like chihuahuas? It could be anything. And use these questions and ask them about your character. Now, the key point the person was telling me here is you do not need to include all this information in your story. That's not the point in this. The point in this is for you to really understand who your character is. And once you have a much more robust view of who your character is, then it's going to be much easier for you to start writing with it. This is especially true if you're using the no planning method. You really need to have a really clear idea about your characters when you start writing. So 100 questions or 1,000,000 questions if you like, but it's a way of finding out sort of using the mundane to help you get a much bigger picture of your character. On the negative side, it takes a lot of time. For me, I find it to be a little bit too forced, but I do know a lot of people who have had success, or I know a few people have had success using this method, and a few people that find it helpful. Like I said, but I'm more into the planning side, so it might be much more useful for someone who prefers not to plan. So another method would be diagramming. So we spoke a lot about mind maps and diagrams last week. Usually I make mind maps for my characters. I find this is quite a useful way to do it. If you're not sure about mind maps, there's some links in the previous page, but just start with the idea and then work out from the center and come up with some useful information about the character. I wouldn't go into details about their breakfast. I would use it to stick to things that are probably going to be part of the story, or at least background to the character. Again, background to the character, you can have it, but don't feel you have to include it in your story. That's not, it doesn't, just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. It's a bit of a trap sometimes when people plan their characters. They can create all this extra information and they really want to tell everyone about all this extra information and it bogs down their story. So be careful with that for all these methods. I would say though, probably the two I like best would be short stories and watching people. So short stories for me are really good. I've mentioned short stories before and how they're useful. But when it comes to characters, it's often good to take a character and you can diagram first, you can do 100 questions first, but test them out, road test them first. Put them in a short story and see, can you write with this person? How do they speak? This is a really important. We'll come to dialogue in another class, but how does the person speak? When you're writing the short story, you can work that out. Their intonation, other such things. You can see, do you actually like the character? There's nothing worse than starting a novel to realize you hate your main character. I wouldn't want to spend a year of my life hanging about with some person that I don't really like. And so short stories are a good way to get the feel of the character in writing before you go on to the main event. The danger is you might feel they are too locked into that short story. But it doesn't have to be a connected short. It doesn't have to be connected to your world. It can just be the same character in a completely different setting and setup, if that helps. Like I said though, so short story writing is one way that you can do it. The other way, and I think this is probably the one I use the most, is just watching people. If you're looking for ideas for characters, use what you already know. Watch the people around you. Sit in a cafe, watch people you don't know. Don't be too much of a stalker. It gets weird. I've never been arrested. Follow... No, I'm not going to say follow people because that makes it sound like I should be arrested. But for me, most of the characters, the main characters, certainly, are me taking some people I know and kind of smashing them together and making something new. Or it's taking someone I know and either turning up the volume or turning down the volume. So I'm maybe taking someone who's a little extravagant and making them a lot more extravagant. I find this is the best way because you're starting with real people and you have some backstory to them. You know things about them that is going to come through in your writing. My favorite character that I made once in Paradigms is a guy called Judas. Almost forgot. He's called Judas, and he's a psychopath, basically. He's based on a friend of mine, which sounds quite nasty. I'm not going to mention the guy's name, but he's not based on the person. He's based on an image that person tries to project of himself. Now, I know you're thinking, I have friends that want to project themselves as psychopaths. Sort of. And it's hard to explain. He wants to be seen as dangerous. He wants to be seen as... But really, he's a nice guy, deep down. And probably wouldn't hurt anybody or anything ever. But he likes the idea. It's possibly something defensive. But the point is, you can use what you know, and you can play around with it. You can merge it. You can twist it. Dangerous though is to take someone you know and directly plop them into a story, because it doesn't often work so well. You can have very limited views of a single person sometimes. You've got to fill in the gaps. You've got to expand them. You might know someone very, very well, but it could be dangerous in many different ways. It's also a little perhaps impolite if you just lift people and throw them down. So I would say merge characters together, or turn up or turn down a character, or take things that people you know try to project of themselves. You can use things from people's lives. I'm not saying don't use real people or real problems, But I think it's generally better to decontextualize them and do something else with them. I think it makes the story much more interesting. Okay, so that was the list we had. So we had the something unusual. So taking the normal stereotype and twisting something, which is quite good for side characters in my opinion. The 100 questions, diagramming, short stories. I think part of all of them is watching people. But the 4 that we have, something odd, 100 questions, diagramming, short stories. What I would like you to do this week is to pick one of those and focus on making a new character. Now, please don't pick a character you already have in mind, someone you've been thinking about for months on end. Try using, I would say, 2 or 3. You can use all 4 or more. Maybe people in your group know more ideas or more ways that you can create a character. But try and do at least 2 of these for different characters. Like I said, you need to experiment and try and find out what works best for you. Don't just say, oh no, I'm not doing that, I do it this way. We're trying to develop, we're trying to grow, and to grow you need to try new things. Maybe it doesn't work out, but you still might learn something from it. And maybe it does work out, and then you have a new way of doing things that's better than before. So don't be afraid to try out new things. Okay, so next week I think we're going to be talking a little bit about plot. Plots and stories, and again similar to today, so maybe some of the big dangers, some of the big problems that come up when people are writing, and some of the cliches, some of the things that you can do to enhance your plot, and some things that people maybe do to detract from their plot. So we'll talk about that though next week in more detail. I look forward to seeing you then, even though I won't really see you. But still, thanks for watching. See you next time.